So today we are talking about the agriculture school. It's a county agriculture school, which I think is an important distinction. Um, so we were talking about, okay, what are we going to talk about for dairying? And I thought, oh, this would be a kind of an interesting thing. We've covered the ag school and other considerations. You might be looking at this building and expecting, oh, that's the normal school. I don't know how widespread that is. It's been gone for quite some time at this point, but this is also the normal school. During the turn of the 20th century, around 1900, the county and I don't know if this is typical all over, Wisconsin or beyond Wisconsin, but certainly in Wisconsin, it's a thing where the counties kind of get into the creating institutions for the well-being of its people, whether that's, the county sanitarium for the tuberculosis patients out on Mountain View, or whether that's, creating hospitals or the asylum for the chronically insane that was established here, the poorhouses, but also things that are going to have a benefit, a tangible benefit for the community, not just in Wausau, not just in Mosinee or Athens or individual places, but like the whole thing. At the normal school, which gets established around 1899 or so, that's the place where you go to learn to be a teacher. And so by having a school to produce teaching certificates, you can have a good quality teachers for the one-room schools all over the county and the region. And the ag school is very similar. Technically it's the School of Agriculture and Domestic Economy. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But again, the idea here is, hey, this is going to be good to have educated farmers, because farming becomes a really important part of the economy here and the fabric of Marathon County. So before we get into the schools, though, I wanted to just kind of give a little bit of background on what is agriculture doing at this point in time. So there are kind of in the 1850s, 60s, 70s, the very early starts of agriculture here in Marathon County. There's kind of two groups that are involved. You have the hobby farmers. You have guys like Wright Brock who goes out and creates the Hellendale farms. He's importing, German dairy cows and experimenting and trying to make see if we can make some money off of this agriculture. But there's also just people that are coming in, a lot of immigrant people speaking German, Polish, Hungarian, Czech. There's some Irish ethnic group people down in Emmett. There's some, there's little pockets of different people, but Norwegians are there. A lot of Germans though, right? And they come in looking for a better world. Maybe they, you come here as somebody from the Baltic coast off of Germany and Pomerania, and you come to Milwaukee and you go, okay, well, I want some land. And so then you find out, oh, there's land to sell up in Marathon County. You buy a little chunk of land, you go out there, and you start your farm. And it's probably not well developed. Very few farms were in these homesteading eras. And these are subsistence farms. You went in with your family, maybe had some others, friends and family, similar coming over. Maybe there was somebody already here and you bought some land nearby. But it would have been, undeveloped. You have to like cut down trees, make a little pasture, little temporary house. This is a picture from later, but you kind of get the idea here of what it would look like. And then as time goes on, you're subsiding. You're not farming as a profession, right? These are not professional farmers. They're just farming because that's the reality of how you put food on the table for your family. But this is going to change. These are kind of isolated little island communities. You speak German. You're going to go with people who speak the same dialect of German. If you're a Lutheran, ooh, you don't really want to be in a community with a bunch of Catholics. And the reality is that, these little communities emerge here and there. And they're kind of self-sufficient. I mean, the idea behind subsistence farms is you don't need to, get a loan from a bank in order to get a contractor to come and build a barn. No, you just build the barn. You and your friends and family, your neighbors, you put it up. You build your own tools. You make your own clothing. Furniture, all that stuff. It's self-sufficient. And the thing is, that kind of works. But eventually we see a shift as other things are happening to more familiar farms. I hesitate to call this a modern farm because that term is maybe shifting. but what we maybe call a traditional farm here. This is not and these are professional farmers. These are people who are doing this for a living, which is different than just doing it because you need to get food. Instead of having a couple cows to just provide a couple, some milk, and maybe some meat through the winter, well, now you have a herd of them. Now you have, instead of just, a patch of vegetable garden, now you have, all this corn that you're doing because they're part of this wider community, right? Farmers in this era that happened around the turn of the century, they're shifting. There's a couple of reasons for this. On one hand, prices for agricultural goods goes up. This is sometimes called like the golden age of farming in Wisconsin, if there is such a thing. Prices are fluctuating, but they're mostly going up. So if you are doing it for a living, it's a good time to do it. You also have those island little communities that are in the sea of the land that is Wisconsin. You have they're sort of isolated. They don't interact with each other. Well, in the 20th century, by the 20th century, you start to see that break down. Certainly in the 19 teens and 20s with like automobiles and road networks. Even if you don't own an automobile and travel around, suddenly the post office is making regular deliveries. And so you can afford to get a newspaper delivered. You can get some magazines and journals and things like that allow you to be part of this bigger world. And then there's also other things that are happening that are breaking down. There's a huge influx of new farms. As the lumber industry dies off, which is to say they use up all the lumber, the people that have been holding on to these tracts of land, the railroad companies, the lumber companies and land companies, they unload this on people looking to start a farm. And so the bits in between the islands, they get filled in with more farmers who are doing this sort of thing. And all this leads to a situation that brings about modern farming, right? And one of the things is, you might think, hey, this is a good time to be a farmer. And it is, but even though the price for goods is going up, it's studies have shown that they actually lost their buying power. Even though they're making more money, in order to make that money, you need to have the modern technologies that make it possible. So you got to have a steam engine, or you have to have a neighbor nearby that has a steam engine, right? So somebody's going to have to pay for that. And that's not expensive, or it is expensive. And of course, technology is always shifting, right? And it's one thing, back in the 1850s where you can make your own plows and scythes and tools. In the 20th century, you're not, cooking up an Alice Chalmers tractor in your garage with your neighbors. Like, that's not something you can just make on your own. It's something that you're going to need to buy. And so there's this extra need. So even though they're making more money, in order to make the money, they need to invest even more. And this means that many people go into debt. Farmers go into debt, and not just for tools, but also for these guys, for cows. With the explosion of dairy farming in this community, which is, it's interesting to think of it now because I don't think people consider dairy farming a cash crop, but it kind of was. It was the thing that works here in the turn of the century, and so you see the shift. And the thing is that it's not. Getting a herd of cows is expensive, especially getting the right herd of cows. You want the right breed. You want that's gonna fit. You're gonna want the animals that are bred to get more milk, and be healthier and hardier and all of these things. And that's not an easy thing to do. And so eventually we do get to the point again where we have these herds of cows. But in order to afford that, many of these, like Hoard's Dairyman, like the journal of note during this period, even like they had articles saying in the 1890s, it's good for you to take a mortgage on your farm. Go into debt to get some cows. It's going to be good for you in the long run. And maybe it was and maybe it wasn't. But the reason that I'm going into so much detail about this, I think, is it's important to understand, like, what does this have to do with the agriculture school? Well, farmers during this era recognized that the margin for profit and loss gets shorter and shorter every year. So you better be smarter about what you're doing. If you're going to be a farmer as a profession, if this is your livelihood, you should know what you're going to do. And that leads us to the ag school. So the Marathon County School of Agriculture and Domestic Economy was established in 1902. There was a law the legislature passed in 1901, the year before, that provided for this route for counties to establish schools of agriculture and domestic economy, which is why we do this. And And so, yeah, this gets started. It shares with a normal school. I think this might be a normal school picture. It's kind of it's labeled as the ag school, but I'm not sure. But this is the same sort of look of that the building would have had, that the students would have had, the environment in some regards. I think the ag school certainly would have had more of a hands-on, like that was kind of the idea. It was a 2-year program. So you'd come and it wasn't like a year-round program. It was, fitting in the farming months, of course. But yeah, it's a 2-year program. They come, they do work. It's a lot of hands-on. Here's how to do this. It's a lot of experience of like things that you might think, well, wouldn't the farmers, if you grew up on a farm, wouldn't you know the difference between different breeds of animals or the different types of crops or what you need to feed them and these simple things. But honestly, not everybody had that. And you had the extra bonus of going and getting the most current information. In terms of the number of students that were here within this school here. So you could kind of think of like the institution of the county school. There are 2 colleges underneath it, kind of like a university has like the College of Letters and the College of Fine Arts and the College of Sciences. There's sort of departments within this. And so the agricultural and domestic economy is one of those. And that school they don't always tell you what the numbers are, but it's somewhere between 30 to maybe, I don't know if they ever broke 60, but that's kind of the number that they had through this period, through the 19 teens by this point, and aughts and teens. So to understand why this all comes about, I think we also need to talk about the Progressive Era. So here's Bob La Follette, one of the big figures of the day. The Progressive Era is its own huge topic, and I don't really want to get too deep into the nuances because it can be a social movement, it's a civil rights movement, it's a political movement, it's an organizing movement. There's a lot of different aspects during this era, but generally a couple of the things that are kind of important to keep in mind throughout all of those different things, whether you're looking at the civil rights movement for women to vote, whether you're looking at making sure that the patent medicines that are going around won't get you addicted to opium and kill you if you take it, stuff like that, like that was happening. Whether that's breaking up the banks and the monopolies on the railroads, all of that stuff. There's an idea that the government, widespread understanding that the government should be there to help the people, not the interests, not the bank owners and the railroad guys and the company, the people, right? So it's a very populist movement in many regards, but it's also there's this belief that using science and specifically scientific management, you could improve your lot in life. A great example of this is the assembly line. Somebody sat down and went, okay, well, you can go through and figure out how to make things, and you can, like if you're making an automobile, right? Let's break it down into all the steps and then streamline it, and then we can make it much quicker. And that kind of thinking gets applied to other things like farming. And specifically, one of the experiences of this is Charles Van Hines. The University of Wisconsin gets established, right? It's a state school. It's a state school, land school, grant school. It's a land grant state school. Charles Van Hines kind of articulates this idea in 1905 that has been kind of percolating throughout the system. And he says that I shall never be content until the beneficent influence of the university reaches every family of the state. Basically, what the idea here is the university is an institute of the state. It's a state school. Everything that the university does, all the research coming out of it, should really be something that's going to help someone in Wisconsin. If you're a chemist, looking at chemistry or instead of taking Pacific fish and figuring out salt content or, whatever, well, that's not going to help people in Wisconsin. So why not look at soil conservation, the moisture conservation in soil? Like that's something that's going to have a very concrete thing that we can do. Later, this idea that gets kind of articulated here is coined the Wisconsin idea by Charles McCarthy, who's another guy who's kind of important in this period. So this is a cool idea, right? Why not? This is something that like Charles McCarthy, he ran a group that was, looking at statistics, and they used those statistics to figure out solutions to common problems. Like this is an issue, we should address it, and here's the data to prove it, and here's some ideas that would improve it. And that's great when you're dealing with policymakers. You can go down the street to the Capitol and say, "Hey, Senator, let me tell you about workers' compensation insurance and how it would save the state money." But how do you get that information to the farmers? Farmers aren't coming down, if I'm living on a farm, somewhere between Marathon and Athens, I'm not getting on a train to go down to Madison to knock on the door of a professor and say, "I hear you've been doing some interesting work with soil conservation." Like, no, it's not going to work. So instead, they create programs to get out into the area. So this is an example. Obviously, this is that building, the normal and ag school, Marathon Park back. This is also, by the way, a negative that was double exposed. So there's a little bit of other things here. So that's why it looks kind of odd. But yeah, Marathon Park before it was Marathon Park, back when it was the county fairgrounds. This is Stewart Avenue. Um, yeah. Now, I should be clear here. The agriculture school is a county institution. It's not affiliated directly with the university. But the university had been kind of figuring out these programs. Back in the 1890s, they started doing short classes and dairy classes, which became really, really popular. And so they realized, oh, there's something to this. And with the agriculture school being established by the counties, they become sort of a vehicle for getting information out there. And a great example of this goes in 1909. There's a one-day course that's held in Wausau, the farmers course, they called it. It was held at the courthouse, where they had big venues for that, except for the TB demonstration, the tuberculosis. Apparently, cows get tuberculosis, so they had a demonstration of some regard. They didn't really go into the details, but that was on the grounds. So what did they talk about here? Well, here's a schedule. In addition to, like, there was music, there was singing and performances to kind of entertain people, but this is the basic idea. So these are like the blocks, kind of a convention situation here, right? You got Professor Humphrey talking about eliminating the scrub bull. Then you have a block where you could learn about the agriculture development here in Marathon County, or learning about selecting the feeding stuffs, or corn growing. And again, you have academics, professors, Dr. Alexander in the evening talking about the breeds of draft horses. Again, for the ladies, we have the rural school development, that would be the domestic sciences. Um, Also of interest, they had a young people's section that went concurrent with this. And these were presented, like, this isn't necessarily like, these are students that are presenting, but they're not just like sitting there and going like, "Here's my book report." Like, this is stuff that people didn't necessarily know about. The Babcock butterfat milk tester, um, that's a new thing. And so by showing it off, and this is something that could be useful. These are showing that they're being engaged in modern discourses about new learning, new technology. So in addition to that, and I wanted to kind of show the kids there, because this is not just a school where the benefit is not just bringing these youths to learn here. It's not just about hosting a couple events. They're also getting out into the county. And so this is a great example from 1918, in which the president, or the principal of the school, A.G. Berg, was asking boys and girls across the county to gauge their interest in a county sheep and wool club. Clubs become really important as a way of mobilizing and getting ideas in this education across. Obviously, the sheep and wool club doesn't necessarily become a household name, but the 4-H clubs that are emerging around this time, they're going to stick around. The homemakers clubs, Futures Farmers of America, like a lot of these sort of clubs that are geared towards rural and agricultural people are going to be kind of helpful going forward. Because in 1918, the School of Agriculture and Domestic Economy, run by the county, is ended. They decide to stop offering it. In 1918, in May, they have a class of, I don't remember, 12 graduates, but there's a class of 32. This is during World War I, so you might think there's less interest, but there still is a lot of interest. To the point where people don't really understand, well, why did they close it? This is a letter to the editor in the aftermath of this. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but basically in response to the idea that the county needs to produce, like, during the war, it becomes a patriotic duty for farmers and everybody to produce more food and use less food. because we need to feed troops and our allies and all that sort of stuff. And so, in the face of this, this letter to the editor writer says, well, what why is the response from the county to remove the only institution in the county that can train future farmers? That seems like a no-brainer, and yet, why? And at the end, they say, in my crude way, I hope to lay out why I think this, and may cause an explanation to be forthcoming as to the reasons why. Like, nobody's really said anything. Now, I would imagine there's a cost involved, and also we're kind of moving away from county institutions with education. And not completely, but over the course of the next couple decades, we're going to see a shift. This is of course that building after the ag school and domestic economy school leave. The Normal takes it over. They go until 1945. Again, World War II lends the end to that. But there's also county programs. Or sorry, not county programs. So I guess there are county programs too. You do have the solidification of the homemakers and the 4-H and groups that are doing that. Holstein and Breeder Association. Clubs that are geared around specific types of common issues. There's also school programs like the high schools have agricultural farming education stuff. The county or the UW Extension formally gets here in 1933. They start doing classes. In 1947, they move into this building after it's vacated by the Normal School. And the following couple years, they renovate it, and this becomes the home to the University Extension, which is going to stay here. Obviously, this building has been replaced, but now this is the University of Wisconsin Stevens Point at Wausau. Yeah. And of course, agriculture is a big part of that. That becomes the group. The Extension is the group that today coordinates the 4-H clubs of the county. What homemakers that are still around are still coordinated through this. So yeah, and that's kind of an overview of the ag school. Again, I didn't want to go into too much detail here because I cut a bunch of really interesting sort of big picture stuff, but I think I hopefully got a nice balance of that. And I think the importance here is it kind of jumpstarts this transition to modern farmers that need to be educated. Of course, as time goes on, the vocational school, the tech school, the universities, there are some very specialized like business, agricultural business. These days you have to really be knowledgeable about our farms, about the process of growing the vegetables and raising animals. I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert on any of that stuff. So, but I know that it's a lot of work and a lot of education that needs to go into making it possible. And that kind of starts in many ways with the county's institution of the ag school, which also has the benefit of kind of bringing together the county in a new way. Those island communities that I talked about, well, as part of the ag school, it doesn't matter whether you're, off of a farm through Frankfurt, or you're in the town of Maine, or you're the town of, Marathon. Like, this is a common place that everybody can use. I mean, if you could afford to come here and learn about how to be a good farmer. And this kind of sets that tone for kind of bringing everybody together and educating people on how to do their job or their profession, farming, right? So anyway, that's today's talk. Next week, Gary will be back. Gary Gisselman will be telling you about the rural architecture, which is the story of, I mean, we of course spent last month talking about the agriculture, or the architecture of historic preservation, and we're going to kind of continue that a little bit with some rural stories about barns and homes and that sort of stuff. So again, that'll be same time, 12:30 on Thursday. If you want to join us for that, we hope you will.